I was in Hong Kong. It was probably 10, 12 years ago. I think it was the Premier League trophy at the time, and the weather was that bad that the pitch at the stadium in Hong Kong was terrible, and they actually started painting the pitch green just to try and make it look better than it was. And obviously, I think it was Man City Sunderland who played that game, and City weren't happy about it. Sunderland weren't happy about it. Now, the reason I mentioned Hong Kong is because Arsenal played Tottenham in Hong Kong in probably about 10 days' time, and I know you were at Tottenham last week meeting Thomas Frank, his first press conference. He seemed quite impressive from afar. So, how did you take it, and what do you think Tottenham's prospects are going forward with Thomas Frank?
Yeah, I thought he was maybe a touch nervous. Just he didn't quite have the answer for everything in a way that I think sort of underlines the step up that he's making. Really, there was quite a few times in that press conference that, I mean, he spoke very well because he always does, but there were a few times where he literally sort of said, "Oh, good question. You know, that's something I need to think about." One of which was one of the questions that I asked him about who his captain is going to be, because there's a lot of speculation over Son Heung-min, whether he's going to stay even this summer. We know, I mean, ESPN, we broke that story a couple of years ago that there was Saudi interest in him, and that is still there. He's got a year left on his existing contract. And although he confirmed that Son and Christian Romero actually would both captain the sides each for 45 minutes at Reading, which is what happened the other day, he refused to say whether he decided if Son would stay as club captain. And that obviously is quite a significant story, given he's been there a decade. He's just finally won his first trophy. He will go down as a club legend. And, you know, and arguably he's in that position where he could dictate what he wants to do. You know, should he leave the club on his own terms after everything that he's done for them? So, you know, there's some big issues rumbling on in the background. Romero's another one. We know that Atletico Madrid are interested in him. Spurs don't want to sell him, but there is a suggestion that maybe the player is unsettled, and, you know, it remains to be seen just how much he wants to try and force through a move, and that could be a big problem for Thomas Frank. In the same way, of course, that Ange Postecoglou, when he came in his first summer, he lost Harry Kane the day before the season starts. So I thought he handled everything generally quite well, but it is a strange situation for him to be going into. You know, normally you go into a club as a new manager with the club being a sort of complete mess, whereas obviously he's taken over a team where there's a real mixed feeling among the fan base at the moment, because they've just won their first trophy in 17 years, yet they had their worst Premier League season ever. And, you know, there was such an outpouring of sort of positive emotion towards Postecoglou from many of the players on social media that he has got a bit of a battle there just to establish himself. And I think if you then on top of that add in the fact that he's obviously moving to a bigger club, a less stable environment, going from Brentford, where he ruled the roost and had been there many years, to Tottenham, who I think had sacked 5 managers in the time that Thomas Frank had been at Brentford. And again, there's been a lot of change at the top of the club. Vinay Venkatesham's come in as the new CEO, been a bit of a reshuffle behind the scenes in terms of the hierarchy above him. So it's a big challenge for him. And it was funny that he asked us actually what the odds were of Tottenham to win the league. And none of us knew off the top of our heads. And right at the end of the press conferences, we were getting our dictaphones and walking back. I looked it up and I told him, I said, "Oh, it's 66-1." And he said, "Oh, where does that put us?" And I said, "You're 7th in the betting." And he said, "Oh, right, okay, well, maybe I'll have some each way money on it." Obviously, he was joking. He can't bet. He knows he can't bet. But I didn't have the heart to tell him that Manchester United were 40-1.
I heard him say that there are 3 teams ahead of us right now, and I'm thinking, sorry, what? You finished 17th in Premier League last season. What's happened this summer? You brought in Mohamed Kudus, and you might be getting Morgan Gibbs-White. So what makes you think there's only 3 teams better than you? So maybe we should park that a little bit.
I can tell you that because that was my question. One of my other questions to him was, we were just talking about, he was trying to get this idea across that Spurs have got to be capable of competing on 4 fronts. And I think that is quite a significant messaging behind the scenes. That was one of the reasons why probably the main reason that Postecoglou lost his job, was that he had made a judgment call in January last year that they could only win 1 trophy and they could only prioritise and concentrate on 1 competition. And fundamentally, the hierarchy at the club disagreed with that. They believed that squad was good enough to be able to not just sack off the second half of the Premier League season. And I think it's significant that Thomas Frank is already talking about almost framing success in the terms of competing across 4 competitions right the way through to the end. Now, those 3 clubs, I mentioned to him, well, how difficult is it going to be to compete on those 4 fronts when you look at Liverpool, you look at Manchester City, you look at Arsenal, and you look at the money that they're spending in the market. And he said, well, those three clubs are a bit ahead of us at the moment. And it sort of took me back to this. I feel like this is a sort of cyclical thing that so many Spurs managers end up talking about. Antonio Conte used to talk about it all the time, which is the gap between Spurs and the top sides, and how big it is and how far away they are and how many years is it going to take to bridge. It feels like it's the perennial problem for Spurs. And it's now Thomas Frank's. It's the one that he's inherited, and it's the one that he's going to have to try and close.
So we know that they're trying to sign Morgan Gibbs-White from Forest, and that is in a bit of a legal logjam right now. So who's your money on? Daniel Levy or Evangelos Marinakis? Two guys who are, very, very happy to, go the legal route, be very hard. So it's tough. That's almost like, Usyk versus Fury, isn't it? That's a big one, that one.
It really is. It's to the extent that I kind of want to bottle the answer so that I don't irritate one of two of the most litigious and difficult men in football. No, I mean, ultimately these things tend to come down to the player, don't they? If Morgan Gibbs-White really wants to move to Tottenham, he'll probably move to Tottenham. But it might have to get quite ugly before that happens. I think he clearly does want to go to Spurs. I suspect the deal will probably happen, but who knows? When the lawyers get involved, and Marinakis is not one to back down in these situations, so yeah, it could become very protracted and very difficult. But you just sort of think eventually the club probably has to think, well, if the player doesn't want to be here anymore, is there any point keeping him against his will? I mean, what are we really going to get out of him? How much is he really going to be able to deliver? There are obviously players who've been denied moves in the past and they've been able to knuckle down and get on with it. I'm not saying Gibbs-White can't do that, but it just casts a real doubt over the club that obviously they're going into Europe this season. They don't need this kind of distraction, and the message that it sends to the rest of the group, really, that you've got one of your talismanic figure who doesn't really want to be here, but he's still here. I don't know. It just feels as though if Gibbs-White really agitates for the move, I think he'll get it.